Hello and welcome. It's our Confessions podcast. Here's another one. This week's concise collection of terrible tales includes some H2O hysteria, a ratty relative, some bare best buddies, and Mrs. Trump's tantrum. But would you forgive? BBC Radio 2, welcome to the Drive Time Confessional. The collective are here and ready to go. Nice. Is that a Mission t-shirt you got there, brother?
It is, yes. They were very good last night.
Playing with?
The Cult.
Who were better?
The Mission.
Did you go a mosh?
I did, yes, quite a lot
You're
of that.
You're like a student, Matt.
I am desperate to regain my youth. Please let me be young again. No.
Here's tonight's confession. It comes from Ollie. Thank you very much indeed for tonight's tale. Send yours via the website or send us an email. Dear Father Simon and the Omnipotent Collective. For 20 years I've carried this burden of guilt with heavy heart and a sense of remorse, and I ask that you consider my actions charitably and see your way to forgive. My tale takes me back to 1992 when I was a young employee of a large privatised water company, fresh from my studies and out to take on the world. My little sister at the time was pregnant with her first child and was a mass of hormonal upheaval, constantly needing support and reassurance, to which I was sympathetic to a point. However, on the day in question, I was clearly not my usual patient self when she called me on the phone to complain that the water coming out of her kitchen tap was a horrible shade of brown. Oh, that'll be iron oxide, commonly known as rust, I told her. I think our company's just been doing some work in your area on the water mains. Don't worry, it's harmless. Just let the tap run for a while. It will soon clear. A very reasonable response, I thought. Well, my sister wasn't happy with that, and she started shouting at me, raising my ire somewhat. In order to placate her, I suggested that maybe I should talk her through the water treatment process to explain how safe her water was and put her troubled mind at ease. At this suggestion, she calmed down and sat quietly, awaiting the sharing of my vast knowledge on the subject. Well, I said, first the water is pumped out of the ground or reservoir and passed through a big sieve, I began. This takes out all the dead animals. What? My sister exclaimed, quite understandably. Hold on, I shouted. Let me finish. After that, they put it through a fine sieve, and that takes out all the insects and the smaller animals. Clearly from the noises at the other end of the line, my sister was enjoying my explanation, so I continued. Then the water is pumped through a kind of shower system to oxygenate the water and encourage the bugs and the bacteria to swell up. Then a small amount of aluminium oxide or iron oxide is added to work as a super coagulator. This causes all the mud and muck to stick together so it can be filtered out more easily. There was complete silence at the other end of the phone by now, so I continued. Well, next the water goes through a sand filter which removes the super coagulated muck. This might happen a few times until it is clear of all the turbidity. Finally, sodium hydrochloride or calcium hydrochloride is added to disinfect the water. It was at this point that my lovely hormonal sister interrupted with a cry of, "But I'm pregnant! I don't want all these horrible chemicals in my water!" How did I do as a hormonal pregnant woman there?
Not very well, really.
How should I have done that?
But I'm pregnant. I don't want all these horrible chemicals in my water.
Okay, that'll do. Being slightly worn down by the demands of a very moany sister, I added my final blow. Well, I wouldn't worry about that. Both are perfectly harmless in the small doses used, and anyway, sodium hydrochloride is basically chlorine added at trace amounts of 0.3 to 0.5 milligrams per litre, and it just helps to keep the water clean and fresh. I think if I were you, I'd be more worried about the dihydrogen oxide, and if you suspect they're using that, you should complain immediately. Well, my sister was outraged. Are you telling me they're putting dihydrogen oxide in my water? Well, yes, I replied sagely. I think you should call the water board and demand that they remove it if you feel that strongly about it. It was at this point that my sister rang off in a huff. I replaced the receiver with glee, pleased at having got rid of her and her moaning. Half an hour later, she was back. "I hate you!" she bellowed. "How could you have been so mean?" Strangely, I didn't hear from my sister for several weeks after that, and she's never once called me again about water-related issues. Father Simon, I beg forgiveness not from my sister, who was pregnant, needy, and particularly gullible, just in need of some reassurance. But I wish to ask forgiveness for the poor call centre attendant who was faced with a screaming pregnant woman demanding that the water be removed from her water supply because, obviously, dihydrogen oxide is more commonly known as H2O, or indeed water, to you and I. In my defence, I've now seen the error of my ways and travel the world supplying dihydrogen oxide to the victims of disasters and occasionally accidentally bringing sub-Saharan countries to a standstill, which I hope will work in my favour. As I fall at the mercy of the ever-caring collective. Now the country will have divided into those that go, yeah, I knew it as soon as you said dihydrogen oxide, it was H2O, and the other half will be pretending. Anyway, so let's see how we go.
I'm not sure about half and half, actually.
No, okay.
Let's get 2080 or something. I think that Ollie wasn't very sympathetic, considering his little sister was pregnant and hormonal. And, I mean, she was just calling to have some reassurance. He could have given it to her. Didn't need to do all this patronising guff. I know, but, and also, you've got to be careful about a hormonal woman. Really, you do.
Is that right?
He should have known that. So I think, for that reason, Ollie, you're not forgiven.
Did you get the dihydrogen oxide, Mother Superior?
Well, what do you think,
Of course
Simon?
you did.
Of course I did. Yes, of course I did. I mean, I think that,
It's a good gag.
yes. I'm amazed that you remembered that. What was it again?
Dihydrogen oxide.
Oh, really? I just think that Ollie sounds. No offence, Ollie, but you sound incredibly boring. I mean, even if she wasn't pregnant, there would be really no reason for you to go into that immense amount of nonsensical detail.
No, she wanted all the detail.
I don't know that she wanted as much as he gave her, in all honesty. And it was complex. It was completely not.
Big sieve that takes out dead animals is quite useful.
Yeah, but honestly, actually, it's put me off. It has put me off a bit.
Small sieve that takes out little animals and insects.
Drinking from the tap, yes. Well, that's all well and good, but I think a little bit patronising to keep calling her, pregnant and hormonal. And I don't expect she shouted as much as you say she did. So, but I'm not going to forgive you because you could have been a little bit more understanding. I think.
Well, let's see what Brother Matthew thinks.
That's got to be a first, hasn't it? Getting coagulant into a confession.
I think so.
Not just the once, but twice. Well done for that.
And turbidity.
Oh, yeah, turbidity, which I had no idea what that was. Do we know what that is?
Well, I think we all know.
I think we all know what that is, so no, we don't.
Excessive turbs.
Indeed, quite a lot of... well, let's hope it's not
Turbs. T-U-R-B. Turbidity.
With a B.
Well, yeah, but
So he does sound like an insufferable, patronising bore. I'd have put the phone down if I were a hormonal pregnant woman, which, I'm not, and I'm not likely to be anytime soon. So I'm going to say I'm not going to forgive, because you are a bit of a bore and a bit patronising, and frankly deserve everything that's coming to you. With your dihydroxide... But whatever it was.
Did you work it out?
I did,
Of
yeah.
course you
Obviously,
did.
of course I
Obviously
did,
you
along
did.
with me turbidity.
Ollie, you're not forgiven, but it's the people's verdict that you have to wait for, of course. 88-291. Confessions of people who work in recently privatised water companies.
Yes, please.
We'll take those reservoirs, water, or hormonal pregnant people.
There's got women. We can probably narrow that down.
Okay, true. We'll take your confessions, please. Confessions at bbc.co.uk or via the website. Nicely pointed out, Matt.
Yeah.
The Confessions movie is up and running. The collective are assembled in front of me, and tonight's tale comes from Emma. Thank you for tonight's confession. You can confess online, or you can send us an email. Dear Father Simon and the Holy Order, I am writing to ask your absolute forgiveness for the sin I am about to confess. I have a big sister, Jane, who is, shall we say, a bit of a control freak, especially when it comes to her car. About 10 years ago, she treated herself to a new car, who she called Hercules. It had that lovely shiny new smell and was pristine. She wouldn't let us eat or drink in her new car, even on those long trips from London to Cornwall, where our family still live. We starved to death on those trips so that she could keep Hercules in mint condition. However, I was carless. She did let me borrow the car on some occasions, and I felt honoured and overwhelmed that she trusted me enough to use her prized possession. One day, my other sister, who lives with Jane, asked me to take some garden sacks of rubbish to the refuse tip using Jane's car. It was the only mode of transport. When our older sister had asked Jane, she of course refused to put such unclean, disgusting items in her car and said no. I wrestled with my conscience and thought, okay, if I put lots of plastic sheeting down in the boot, what harm could it possibly do? She would never know, and so, as any good sister would, I helped out and got rid of the horrible garden waste, ensuring that the car looked clean on my return. Surely nothing can go wrong. That weekend I borrowed Hercules to go and visit my boyfriend. After a lovely romantic night, I kissed him goodbye at the door of his flat, and he watched from the top window as I got into the car and turned the ignition on. Then he watched as I leapt from the car in total shock. "What's wrong?" he called out the window, seeing my aghast expression and my now pale complexion. "There's a rat in the car!" I screamed. Yes, as I put the key in the ignition, a chunky, dirty grey rat ran across the dashboard, scaring the life out of me and causing me to leap out of the car. What could I do? My boyfriend came down from his flat, armed with a poking device, which he then puts in brackets, tennis bat. I think it's probably a racket, isn't it?
Yes.
Or it could be a table tennis. It could be a table tennis bat, I suppose.
Yeah.
To save me from my predicament. The rat had disappeared from view, and in the pitch black night was hard to find. I made my boyfriend sit in the car with the door shut to see if he could hear it squeak.
Right, fine.
Which he did, with his feet up on the seat in case the blighter ran up his jeans leg. We poked and prodded under the seats, looked in the boot, searched for about 45 minutes. Alas, the rat was nowhere to be found. He or she must have jumped out and made his escape when we weren't looking. I decided to drive home petrified that it may reappear and jump out at me, causing an accident. Are you all right there, Mother Superior?
Oh, I feel ill.
My boyfriend and I swore to secrecy about the rat invader, as it obviously came from the garden rubbish bag, and if Jane found out, she really would have killed me dead, and never, to use an interesting expression, and never let me borrow her car again. This would have been terrible, as my boyfriend and I would have had to endure forced separation. No, secrecy was our only option. The rat story will never be told. Anyway, it had gone from the car and was probably enjoying a free existence on a grassy knoll somewhere, or so we thought. Over the following weeks, little gnaw marks appeared on the locks of the front doors and the upholstery of Hercules. Jane asked what had caused these little scratches on the locks and the seats. I said I had no idea. Maybe she knocked it or scratched it with her handbag or something like that. And then she started to comment on Hercules having a funny smell. She thought it strange and bought a vast array of car fresheners to mask this peculiar smell. "Can you smell it?" she asked every time I got in the car. I always said, "No, definitely not, can't smell a thing." This was a lie, as it smelt rotten and foul. That weekend, Jane deposited her winter clothes into storage, as she often did, because she had lots of clothes, and we all enjoyed a lovely summer. Now we fast forward 6 months. It's getting colder. As the winter arrived with its icy chill, Jane went up to storage to retrieve her winter clothes, and as she pulled a bag from a high shelf, a very smelly, very stiff, decomposing and very dead rat fell from the bag onto her head. Jane screamed and did a funny dance as it had got stuck in her hair. Then picked up this rotting rodent and marched to the manager of the self-storage depot to make a complaint about the facility being riddled with vermin. The manager took her complaint very seriously and called out the exterminators. They conducted a thorough search of the facility but found no trace of any rats or other vermin anywhere within their confines. But the evidence was overwhelming, and he made enormous and elaborate apologies to my sister. I have never ever confessed to anyone about taking that rubbish to the tip and unwittingly starting this chain of events. I'd like to apologise to Jane, to the exterminators, and the poor downtrodden manager of the self-storage for everything. Most importantly, to the poor rat who met his untimely end in a hatchback car and not in a beautiful field or drain running free. I don't think we've had a rat-based confession. I'm sure there are plenty more to come. Self-storage or sisters who are control freaks. These are all very welcome. What do you say, Sister
I love
Rebecca?
that confession. That is superb. So the rat basically died in the car and then got tangled in with the clothes and then went into storage. Is that what we think happened?
That's pretty much what happened.
God, that is just awful for the rat, isn't it? And awful for Emma to know that the rat was probably in the car and running around.
I like the idea of the dead rat falling into her hair and then getting stuck.
It's just terrible. And if you have a thing about rats, this is a truly awful story.
It's a bad one.
But obviously she was trying to help her other sister out, and she was horrified when she found out about the rat. I mean, none of this is intentional, and I don't think I would have told my sister if she was such a control freak and,
It's just
so
motivated-
obsessed by her car.
Just motivated by lust for her boyfriend.
I don't think so.
Is it not? Okay, fair enough.
It was motivated by wanting to help her other sister.
Is it right?
So I think that even though it was really awful for her sister to have a rat fall in her hair and for the self-storage guy to have to get the exterminators in, you're forgiven, Emma.
The Mother Superior.
I think there was a bit of lust involved, wasn't there? There was a bit of having a little bit of hanky-panky at some point and trying to impress the boyfriend. But having said that, I really don't think I can forgive you. I really don't, because if I found a rat, if I'd lent my car to someone, and then I knew that there'd been a rat in it and that it had gnawed away at some of my leather interior, I would not be very happy, I have to say. So I think it was a bit cowardly of you not to confess, oh, this has made me feel really quite ill, this whole story. But I wouldn't really forgive you. I'm sorry.
I did like the fact that, can you smell this? No, can't. No, definitely. It's not decomposing vermin.
Rat.
Definitely
Yeah.
not.
Oh.
Brother Matthew, you're made of stronger stuff.
It's not, I don't think it's very fair to label the sister a control freak just because she won't allow you to use your car and then have a rat run around
You can eat
in the
any
car.
food from London to Cornwall.
What on earth is going on with this poor girl that she's driving? She's been driving around in this car and there's been a rat in the car the whole time. She'd have gone nuts. I tell you what, I bet if she's heard this, she'll recognise this story straight away. Oh yeah, I do remember the gnaw marks on the door. Not many of us have got gnaw marks on our doors, and that smell, and that thing falling on my head. And it turns out it wasn't the storage place at all. It was my own sister who's labelled me a control freak. Shame on you.
So not
forgiven.
then.
Definitely
Okay,
not.
Thank you very much. Tonight's has come from Safi. Safi, thank you very much indeed. Father Simon and the Renowned Collective. I would like to confess a secret that has haunted me over the last 15 years. As an 18-year-old girl, I was slightly naive and easily led by my seemingly more worldly wise best friend, Anna. Anna even had a 21-year-old boyfriend, Barry, who had spent the summer in the south of France. Always a risky thing. When he returned to our less exotic hometown of St Anne's-on-Sea in Lancashire, he was full of his adventures. He'd been particularly impressed by the naturist community he'd come across in Cap d'Agde. He told tales of naked beach parties and how the people were far freer in spirit than us uptight Brits. He suggested to Anna that they should all have a naked beach party in the sandhills of St Anne's. I bet he did. It was early September, and still quite warm, and being slightly besotted with Barry, Anna said OK. And she'd bring me along too, which was nice of her. Barry said he'd bring his friend Matt to make it a nice round number. When I heard about this, I was totally horrified. Genetics had, shall we say, been very kind to Anna, whereas it most certainly hadn't been very kind with me, and I was quite uncomfortable, to be perfectly honest, in my own body, as at some time I imagine most of us have experienced the same feeling. But then maybe you weren't about to go to a naked beach party. Has anyone here been to a naked beach party?
No, but I've been naked on a beach.
Have you?
Let's not get distracted. You're just trying to get on innuendo bingo and Scott Mills again, aren't you? 3 days later, we went to the party. We took the number 11 bus, still fully clothed, got off at the sandhills, which were practically deserted. Anna had agreed to meet the boys in a place in the middle of the sandhills. We climbed over the hills until we heard music. In a gully hidden from the rest of the coast, a small cassette player was playing New Order next to a couple of bottles of cider and two rather awkward-looking, completely naked chaps. They hadn't seen us coming, and both of us immediately fell to the sand and just stared, without them being able to see us, of course. Anna's early bravery had completely gone, and I don't think mine had ever been there in the first place. We watched the boys for about half an hour as they sat impatiently waiting, probably talking about football or cars. Unfortunately, the notorious fickle, filed coast weather had changed from reasonably warm to quite chilly, and a sharp breeze from the sea was making the boys a little uncomfortable. So, cowards that we were, we didn't investigate further. We slipped off without saying hello. Next day, we made some excuse about our no-show, but Anna's relationship with Barry didn't last too long after that, and I never went out with Mark. But I did hear afterwards that he came down with a case of flu very soon. I have been feeling guilty about my cowardice and Matt's flu ever since, and would like to ask him if he's listening for forgiveness and for the Confessional Collective to give me absolution, if this is at all possible. Well, Safi, this is an interesting tale. I think you did exactly the right thing. Always be suspicious of Barrys who come back from the south of France impressed with the naturist colony. Run a mile with your clothes on. Sister Rebecca, this is a shocker.
I love the image of Safi and Anna dropping like commandos to the ground, if you'll excuse the pun, and hiding from these boys, the naked boys.
In the sand dunes of Sudan.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you can't go to a beach party with 4 people. That's like saying, come on a blind date, it's a beach party, and there are 4 of us.
It's not, it clearly was not a very good idea.
A naked beach party obviously has to involve hundreds of people who don't know each other. It's got to be at night, and that's the whole point.
You seem to know a lot about
it. Yeah, these are the rules, are they?
If it's
This
in
is the way
France
it is
or
in Italy.
something.
Is it?
In
In
France.
Yes,
and all
no,
the other-
I've never been on one, but these are the rules.
Completely inappropriate. So, yeah, no way would anyone have done that, and you're completely forgiven. Completely forgiven.
Yes, Avi, I think so. So now,
Yeah, I mean,
this
my
wicked
experience of
superior.
being naked on a beach is that it's absolutely fine if you don't know anybody because they don't know you. They don't, their expectations, in my case, are very low and met. Not to put too fine on it, but if you know people, I mean, it's like if all four of us said, let's go to a naked beach party, and I saw all of you naked, and
Can we
you
just
saw...
keep to the
but,
script?
It's a very weird thing if you don't know somebody to see them, in the buff. So I would say you are forgiven, and I think it was a bit naughty of him to force you to do it.
Yes, well, indeed. I think, Brother Matthew, how do you find on this?
I remember in a previous life when I was
At Five Live, did they get up to
No,
this
this
kind
is
of
at
thing when you were
Radio
there?
1.
Oh, well, they always do that.
Yeah, I had to go and do a report from a nudist camp, and
With Rob Mackenzie for
yes,
Newsbeat, was it?
and I had to keep my eyes at sort of shoulder length the entire time. And knowing where to stick the microphone. I don't think, frankly, Barry is the kind of person that I would have got on with at all. Yeah, I get sick and tired of these people saying, "Oh, well, it's all so liberating," and why are you all so uptight? Because I've evolved and I've got clothes on.
And I need pants.
You're the one. Yeah, I need the pants, and you clearly need a talking
And
to.
some
frankly.
people need pants more than others, though, Matt, don't
Yes,
they? That's
yes,
true.
yes, that is indeed
Shall we
true,
move on?
Sal. Yes, so I will not. Am I going to forgive? I don't know. Yes, I am going to forgive. I don't know. I'm toss a coin. I've no idea. I've lost it now.
It's Dry Time Confessions. It's 18 minutes to 6 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed for all the tales that we're getting in. You can send yours via the website, or you can send us an email, confessions@bbc.co.uk. Dear Simon and your worthy collective, this is from Craig. My confession took place in the summer of 1989, when I spent the summer holidays working in the USA. It was all perfectly legal and arranged through a reciprocal exchange scheme for university students. I was keen to work in New York and eagerly accepted a job working as a busboy in a country club on Long Island. Now, a busboy is generally the lowest member of waiting staff, expected to clear dishes, bring drinks, serve coffee, that kind of thing. So the exotic and cosmopolitan life I had imagined was quickly put into perspective. This particular country club happened to be one of the most exclusive and expensive in the entire United States of America. Members were the great and the good of the New York political, social and sporting scene. Unfortunately, this did not make some of them very nice to their immigrant waiting staff. My Irish waitress co-worker, let's call her Colleen, though whatever she was told, she was cheerful and she seemed unfazed by their arrogance and their rudeness. I think he set the scene. One evening we had a particularly well-attended dinner, and we were put under enormous pressure to get the food out and cleared away. At last it was time for the coffee, which was one of my jobs to serve. The coffee pots were very heavy, with long spouts, and marked for decaffeinated or regular. I dutifully went around each member of the party at our table, whispering, "Decaf or regular?" and then poured over the shoulder of the guest. Alas, one particularly large lady was difficult to manoeuvre around, and as I poured her coffee, decaffeinated, the coffee pot in my other hand also tipped and poured very hot coffee onto her shoulder. Luckily, this was the 1980s, and shoulder pads were very much in vogue, and she did not initially notice. However, after 30 seconds or so had passed, a thin, warm, brown stream of coffee started to ooze from her shoulder pad and formed a small eddy of coffee that headed straight for her cleavage. It is amazing quite how much coffee can seep from a shoulder pad when it is being watched by an increasing number of people. I did not point out my error in fear of my job and had slipped away by the time she realised that there was a decaffeinated beverage dripping from her dress, the stain now moving towards her ample midriff. Eventually, of course, she howled and berated poor Colleen for the ruined haute couture. To Colleen's eternal credit, when the lady in question said exasperatedly, "Don't you know who my son is?" They all come from Texas. She answered, "No, does he work here?" That lady, Simon, was Mary Ann McLeod, alternatively known as Mrs. Trump. Her son is called Donald. You may have heard of him. I beg forgiveness not so much for ruining one of Mrs. Trump's senior's very expensive jackets, but for not owning up and allowing Colleen to take the blame. And a very bizarre PS here from Craig. I hope you can forgive my indiscretion, because I was later sacked due to actions beyond forgiveness. I told the management I'd failed my exams and had to go home to resit, after which I would return. But instead, I headed to the Caribbean and returned 1 week later, particularly sunburnt, and they guessed, and they gave me my cards. So Craig is not forgiven, but anyway, he would like forgiveness for this particular act where he let Colleen take the blame for the thin, warm, brown stream of coffee that headed for Mrs. Trump's cleavage.
I've done a lot of waitressing in my time, and I've never heard of anyone pouring coffee over the shoulder of the guests.
Apparently.
And these were posh guests. I mean, I just don't get it at all. I mean, that is just an accident waiting to happen, isn't it? You would have thought.
Are you like health and safety today or
Yeah,
something?
yeah. I just think that was a very silly thing to do, and also not fair on Colleen. She probably got the sack. We don't know what happened to her, do we? She
not.
probably got the sack. She probably never worked in Long Island again. He should have owned up. He really should have owned up. That's ridiculous.
How much coffee would a shoulder pad absorb?
Depends
do
on
you
how
think?
big it was, and how many
It's
crenellations.
Mrs. Trump, one would imagine.
Large.
By the way,
Yeah.
she's dead now, in case you're wondering.
Right.
It would be.
So that makes it okay. What?
No, I'm just telling you. But nothing to do with the coffee.
Right, okay.
But if she had big shoulder pads, you could probably get a whole pot in there, don't you think?
Well, yeah, I suppose so, but they're not like vessels. They're flat. Anyway, I think definitely not forgiven, Craig. You should have owned up.
Okay, Mother Superior.
Well, I would imagine...
You've had shoulder
as
pads
she-
in your day, haven't you?
I've had one or two. And I would imagine that if she was Mr. Trump's mother, because she had access to a lot of money, they would have been particularly thick shoulder pads, because I remember the thicker they were, the bigger they were, the more expensive they were. Right. So she would have had very thick ones, as it were. But, anybody who says, don't you know either who I am, or don't you know who my son is, or don't you know who my father is, not worthy of much forgiveness themselves. So I would definitely forgive this poor boy. And I think you made a good point about how did the coffee get. But I think he was pouring coffee out with one hand, and then that one that he wasn't pouring just spilt on her. So
Something
I can
like that.
see how it happened. But you're forgiven, because she sounds like a pompous.
Pompous person. Okay,
Yes.
so it's all down to you, brother man.
Well, I really do think anyone who's rude to waiting staff, frankly, deserves everything they get. But I don't know whether I'd go so far as to say pour scalding coffee all over them and have it
do it
drip down
deliberately.
into
was an accident. It
was an
their
accident.
cleavage. I don't know. I mean, I've done. Yeah, there's many times when I've been waiting and I've had to deal with people who've been rude, and I think, do you know what? I'd love to get my own back, but I'm not going to go far this time. I mean, it's so tempting. It's so tempting because it's Donald Trump or it's his mum, and I'd love to say you're forgiven, but I'm not going to forgive this time.
That was that. More confessions coming for you on Monday's programme. Send in yours, why don't you, via the website, or you can email confessions@bbc.co.uk. Thanks for listening. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to this BBC Radio 2 free download. Now, why not try more?
Jazz for me, I guess, is improvisation.
My pick of the best in rhythm and blues.
Music from Richard Thompson, Chris Wood and Pentangle, amongst many, many others.
All at the BBC Radio 2 website.